sorry I'm not able to make it to class today. I've got Sheila and Kevin here to help make sure that everything goes smoothly. Before they jump into their portion of the activities for today, giving out survival kits as well as practicing with the backpacking stoves and white gas stoves, what I want to do is really quickly go through some reminders for class this week as well as some things that are coming up, and then make sure as well that you get a good background around finding water in the wilderness. So that's what we're going to do. So reminders first. Don't forget that you need to make sure that you're talking to the ALI desk about any gear needs that you have for the outing that's upcoming. We're getting closer to that outing, which is the weekend of the 13th, 14th, and 15th of November, if you remember. So we're getting closer, only 3-4 weeks away. So make sure that you do that. So talk to the desk, let them know any gear that you're going to need for that outing. It's going to be really important that you do that. Secondly, make sure that you're ready to go for the outing in terms of the other equipment that you might need, that stuff that you need to come up with. Refer to that equipment list that's on Canvas. We're going to give you some gear today that should help with that prep work, so it shouldn't be too much trouble. And then if you have your food plan assignments, feel free to turn those into Sheila today. If you don't, you can also slide them under my office door. I'll get to those probably early next week and try to have them grade them and turned around to you. Remember, you just need to turn in one assignment per group, so it should be pretty straightforward. All right, I think that's all the reminders that I had for you. What I want to do now is jump into our presentation around finding water in a wilderness environment. And then after that, I will turn it over to Sheila and Kevin. Let's go ahead. Kill the eyesight from the current slide. All right, so finding water in the wilderness. So obviously we talked about our rule of threes earlier in the class, talking about 3 seconds to get a hold of your mind, kind of deal with panic in a survival situation. You've got about 3 minutes to deal with any medical emergencies that might come up, and then 3 hours shelter, making sure that you've got shelter to provide for your survival. And then the next big 3, as you kind of have guessed, is water in a wilderness environment. So where are we going to find that good clean water that is going to help sustain us? Now here's the deal, right? If we look at like the things that are going to be bad if you don't have water, you can imagine that when it comes down to a choice between drinking water that is, like, say, perfectly purified and ready to rock and roll, it's not going to give you any problems, sickness, illness-wise, or, water that's suspect. If you're in a survival situation, drink the suspect water if you don't have any means of treating it. Most of the onset of the signs and symptoms of, like, a waterborne illness are going to be far later after, hopefully, that survival situation is over, and, less calamitous for you as an individual than, say, some of these things that it would be from going without water. So severe dehydration, don't need to read through this list for you, but you can tell that it is not a thing that we want to have happen to you in a wilderness environment. Probably some of the most important pieces of this are just like the reduction in your level of consciousness, your ability to make good decisions, energy levels, all those sorts of things. You can make it a long time if you have water and you're able to find shelter. Those are 2 big, really key things. So where are we going to find water? We're looking for any like low points. So rivers, lakes, or ponds. One of the best strategies that I've found when I'm trying to find water sources, and I don't necessarily have one that I know of because of the map or my planning, is, get up high and look around. I've got some photos coming up later that'll help illustrate that. You can often see a long ways. You're also going to hopefully be able to kind of pick up on some of those signs of water, right? So looking for like the glimmer or flashing of water, sunlight off of the water surface, especially like, say, early in the mornings or later in the afternoons, evening, when the sun's coming up or going down. When it's low in the horizon, you often get good reflection. Small birds and a lot of our insects, right? So small birds don't travel a long ways without having access to a water source for the most part. So if you're in a highly arid area, look for those little birds. Look for obvious waterborne insects, so things like mosquitoes or dragonflies. Really good indicators there's some water nearby, some moisture nearby. Look for game trails. These small mammals, even some of these larger mammals, they're not going to travel a long ways from a water source. Usually those game trails are either going to or from a water source, a place that those animals spend the night or rest, that they're safe in, and then food sources. So if you travel down those small game trails, you're able to see them. You're often going to go find water pretty regularly. If you're up high and you're looking around, you're looking down into like some of these desert canyons, looking for like changes in foliage, you can often see that there's water based on that change in the color. So looking at something that's like kind of a dry sagebrushy green, juniper green, to something that's like a little more bright, pops a little bit more, looks like there's water there. And then when in doubt, go downhill, right? So if I'm looking to try to find water, I'm usually going to travel downhill, especially in Oregon, especially in Western Oregon. If you go downhill, follow those drainages, you'll usually find some water. And often when we're thinking about finding water in a wilderness environment, if we're thinking about Western Oregon, we're not too worried about it. It usually falls on our heads more than we want it to. So finding clean water, finding water that we can treat is not usually too much trouble. It's more like when we get into environments like the mountains or the deserts where water isn't as readily available, that we might have to be a little bit more aware of our surroundings in order to find that water effectively. Here's some photos kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. In the upper left, you can see, the canyon where the river is, and then the area around it. So it's, very dry and arid environment. And then down in that river bottom or that canyon bottom, you see that there's that bright green coloration. It pops. There's obviously water there. There's larger trees, that sort of thing. We've got like a game trail of some sort, so looking for small paths of like well-traveled areas. Again, in the lower left, aquatic insects. The center of the bottom, that's the John Day River Valley. You can again see that bright green coloration. There's actually irrigated fields there. An irrigated field means that there's water somewhere nearby. You can find it. And then an example of one of those smaller birds. It isn't going to travel particularly far without water. I recently got back from a trip to Red Rocks Canyon to do some climbing. So hiking in this dry stream bed, and you can just see right here there's this pretty dramatic change in the color of the foliage. So further up the canyon at the top half of the photograph, you can see that kind of band of darker green. That's the foliage that's year round, that's not as water dependent. That's what you see kind of everywhere in the canyon in this desert. And actually down by where that climber is kind of scrambling a little bit more, you can see that the foliage changes color. And even high up on the route that we climbed, you could look down at the canyon bottom and you could see exactly where there was like a seep or a spring going on. It was like really clear and obvious as to where there was some water in this canyon. And there wasn't necessarily free-flowing water in these places. We're talking about like a seep where there's like a little trickle. But again, a small trickle like that might be the difference between life and death for you. So, find that small trickle, find that moss, get a bandana wet and, soaking wet, and then wring it out into your water bottle, and then repeat as many times as necessary, something along those lines, and then treat it if we can. Other things we can do, find a riverbed and dig. So, if we were thinking about like that example of Red Rocks, it's in the desert outside of Las Vegas. There were definitely places where there was water subsurface. You could tell based on the foliage, based on you could smell the moisture. You could almost feel the moisture. It's so dry out there. Those would be great places where I bet if I had dug into the sand or the gravel that was on the riverbed there, probably would have gotten like a nice kind of fill in. The water table was pretty high there. In those specific spots, it was inundated. You can also do a transpiration bag or create a solar still. So the folks on the left there, they've got a transpiration bag. They've taken a clear plastic garbage bag and they've captured the limb of a leafy deciduous tree. Those trees, as they absorb sunlight and process that sunlight and carbon dioxide into energy, they will actually release some water vapor as a result of that. The thing that's going to make that more effective is if you have a long drinking tube, kind of like the diagram on the right shows. If you can slide that down inside there at the base of the bag, it'll allow you to take sips out of it in between without having to take it entirely apart. The transpiration bag around the foliage is a way more effective method than the solar still. If you've ever tried to build a solar still, you'll find that they are pretty labor intensive. They take a lot of effort and energy to create. You got to dig a 1.5 to 3 foot deep pit, as well as some fun stuff around the width of that thing. So looking at digging a deep pit, which is difficult in an arid, dry, hot environment, lining it with some plastic, and then hoping that there's enough moisture in the soil and the sunlight to get some water out of there, you're going to get a couple of sips. So people talk about them as survival tools. They're realistically probably not the greatest use of your energy and water balance, but go experiment with them. I think that they'd be worth trying out. So Okay, so we've got some water. We found some water somewhere, whether that's Western Oregon and it's falling on us, or it's the desert and we kind of, always keeping an eye out for water as we're traveling. But we've gotten some water. Like I said earlier in the presentation, if you're dying of thirst, drink the water. Don't worry about purifying it or treating it. But if you have the means, it's definitely worth your effort to try to treat that water, trying to make sure that it doesn't have the little nasties that are going to make you ill. So protozoa, bacteria, and viral contaminants are what we're really worried about. And, I would say in the U.S., depending on the water source, protozoa and bacteria make the top of the list. Viral contaminants are harder to take care of and not as common depending on the water. Again, if you were drinking out of the Willamette, I would treat that really well. I would expect that there would be a pretty high viral content there versus, a stream coming out of, off of the side of the, Cascades off of Mount Jefferson in this pristine wilderness environment. We're probably not going to see as much viral contamination, be more worried about protozoa and bacteria. And don't let anybody tell you that there isn't contaminants in all of our water in North America. There most definitely are. Anybody who tells you that there's, free-flowing surface water that they can just drink without getting ill has just either gotten lucky or lying to you. So let's talk about some methodologies we can use to treat that water. So boiling. Boiling is a really effective manner of doing this. If you've got the ability to start a fire and you're carrying a metal container of some sort, you can boil water to treat it. It's a really good way of doing it. It's a fallback method that I use frequently. So it kills all the nasties. We don't need to carry anything extra if we've got fire or a stove, and you get some hot water out of it, which is pretty dope. Sometimes you have to deal with, or not sometimes, but there are cons associated as well, right? So there's wait time associated with it. You've got to use some fuel, which you get there at the finders carried, and then if there's like bigger chunks of things, sediments, material like that, it's not going to be removed. And then if you're in a desert, you have hot water, which is not necessarily great. I would say we need a rolling boil. So rolling boil is like where vapor is actually coming off of it. We have good steam. The water is like bubbling up from the bottom, not like tiny little fisheye bubbles, but rolling. Right? So not looking like, say when you all cook pasta and you're like, look, the water's hot. And you throw some pasta in there and it's like the tiny little fish eyes, the little tiny bubbles. We're talking about like really boiling. Below 3,000 feet, a rolling boil is sufficient. Above 3,000 feet, you want to do around 3 minutes just to make sure, again, because of the change of air pressure, the temperature which that water boils above 3,000 feet is lower, so you're just going to take longer to kill some of this stuff, remove it. All right, we can also do chemicals. Chemicals is a great way to carry something in a survival kit that is quick, that's pretty easy, and that is very effective. It won't kill some of our viral things, but it will take care of most of our common parasites, these things around the bacteria and the protozoa. It is nice when you can just like scoop up some water in an algae and toss in some chemical and then move on. Typically when we talk about chemicals, we're talking about iodine and chlorine. Those are the two most common ones. They're both cellular membrane disruptors, so they actually get in and mess with the phospholipid bilayer of these little nasties, which I think if you're a biologist is a pretty cool thing. And we're putting them in at a dosage that will harm those nasty things but won't harm us as larger organisms. Some people don't like them because it makes the water taste a little funky. To me, when I taste iodine water, I just feel like it tastes like adventure. Usually it means I'm doing something fun or cool. You can add like a sports drink or anything that has some vitamin C, and that'll help neutralize that taste. Key there is make sure you give it time. Right, so follow the directions on those chemicals. Most of them are going to tell you, the dosage and then the amount of time that you need to wait. Don't forget to treat the threads. Some people have trouble with these chemicals if they've got thyroid issues. Iodine isn't necessarily great, and then it's not going to kill all those viruses. But really quick and easy way to do it. Filtration. Filtration is a way where if I know that I'm going to be drinking water that I'm finding on the trail, it's the plan all along. I'm going to be gone for multiple days. I don't want to be drinking iodine water, and I don't want to waste fuel with boiling. I often carry a filter. They're relatively robust usually. They get clean water that's ready to drink. I don't have any wait time like I would with boiling or chemicals. It doesn't necessarily take out the virus. It works just by having a small enough pore that we squeeze the water through that those other things can't fit through there. They do need some field maintenance at times, and they can clog up. So, if you do go for a filter, they're a little expensive, they're kind of heavy, but you do definitely need to know how to take care of them in the field. I really like this MSR filter that's pictured here. It's a really simple filter. It's pretty straightforward to maintain. It's pretty effective. And I've got a couple examples that Sheila and Kevin can share with you here. And then the last one that we'll talk about here is ultraviolet. So if you've not heard of these before, they're called like SteriPens. It is a really effective means of treating water. It does rely on batteries, so it won't take out any of the bigger chunks. So you're going to have to pre-filter your water, run it through like a handkerchief, or a lot of them come with like a little screen filter. So get the bigger chunks out. And then follow the directions for the SteriPen. They're pretty straightforward to use. They've got like little pictographs to kind of describe when it's effective and when it's not. But they do rely on batteries. For the most part, the early models at least were all like specialized camera batteries. They weren't just like normal batteries, so it was even more annoying and expensive to keep going. And it feels a little bit like black magic, I'm not gonna lie. You like wave this wand in a water bottle for a little while, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to be able to drink that water. And I just don't know. I haven't used them a ton. I have used them some on some longer runs, that sort of thing, and they have worked. I haven't gotten sick, which is pretty cool. But definitely, they cost a lot of money and they're battery powered, so they're probably not something that I'm as big of a fan of. Some people might feel like they're a really great solution, and maybe it is for you. So that is our presentation on finding water in a wilderness environment. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I've got some different models up here that Sheila and Kevin can kind of go through with you. And, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to shoot me an email and we'll get you all squared away. Thanks.